Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France before the French Revolution. Today, the beheaded queen is mainly known for her extravagant lifestyle at the Palace of Versailles in France. She was born on the 2nd of November 1755 in Austria. Marie Antoinette was the penultimate child of Empress Maria Theresa and the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. Empress Maria Theresa gave birth to 16 children, of whom 13 survived infancy. Austria and France have been longtime enemies, and to overcome this issue, an alliance between both countries was initiated by the Austrian monarchs, who offered the hand of their youngest daughter, Marie Antoinette, to the future heir of the French throne. At the time of her marriage, Marie Antoinette was only 14 years old, but to fulfill her mother's demanding wishes, she left her family and country to start a new life in France. In this portrait, the future Queen of France was just 13 years old, and apparently this particular portrait was shown to Louis XVI, so he could see how his future bride would look like. In May 1770, the 14-year-old Archduchess of Austria got married to the future King of France, Louis XVI, who was just 15 years old at that time, just 1 year older than Marie Antoinette herself. Both the future king and queen were very young when they got married. Still, it was their primary duty to give France the next heir to the throne. After their wedding ceremony, the young couple were escorted to the bridal chamber on their wedding night by the groom's grandfather, King Louis XV. The king blessed their bed, gave both a kiss, and left the chamber so the young married couple could fulfill their duties. But nothing happened at that night, and neither did anything happen in the next 7 years. However, Marie Antoinette was not prepared for the life as a queen in France. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, was just focusing on the education of her 4 sons. Public life for her was everything but easy. Apart from having a difficult marriage and having very few official duties as a queen, her daily routine consisted of socializing and indulging in her extravagant tastes. As an example, she built a model farm on the palace grounds in order to dress in costumes and pretend to be milkmaids with her ladies-in-waiting. As a result, she was the spotlight in the French newspaper, and the public officially poked fun at the queen's behavior. Over the time, it became quite fashionable to blame Marie Antoinette, the queen, for every single problem France had. In fact, did you actually know that there was no evidence that Marie Antoinette ever said that starving people in France should eat cake if they had no bread? The story of a noble woman who claimed "let them eat cake" was mentioned in the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, which was written around 1766, and at that time Marie Antoinette was just 11 years old. It was after 7 years when Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI consummated their marriage. It was believed that the king had a painful medical condition that rendered him impotent. Well, unfortunately, the palace gossip at Versailles expanded around Europe. Finally, in 1777, Marie Antoinette's mother, Maria Theresa, sent one of her sons, Emperor Joseph II, to Versailles to help find a solution for this issue. And after that, it was assumed that either this intervention or a surgery corrected the problem, since Marie Antoinette became pregnant and gave birth to her first child, Marie Therese. In 1781, Marie gave birth to Louis Joseph, who became his father's heir, a role known as the Dauphin. Marie was devoted to her children. Although she was often prevented from handling their day-to-day care due to strict royal protocol, when she could, she spent as much as time possible with them. Although Louis and Marie were fond of each other, they were not really greatly in love. For Marie, that role was played by Axel von Fersen, a Swedish diplomat They likely began their affair after he returned from fighting in the American Revolution. The timing of Marie's third child, Louis Charles, in 1785, set tongues wagging throughout France, as many suspected that Louis Charles was in fact von Fersen's son. The following year she gave birth to her last child, daughter Sophie, but unfortunately, less than a year after Sophie's birth, who was born prematurely, died. As time passed, Marie Antoinette became more and more unpopular among the French people. After the royal couple produced a male heir, the queen suddenly transformed from a party girl to a self-controlled woman. But this change came too late. The country was in debt, in huge debt, and the French people accused the queen of this crisis due to her extravagant lifestyle and trivial expenditures. It is true, though, that she spent more than any other person in France and showered her favorites with gifts, with expensive gifts. The expenses of the court itself was huge, while outside the people of France were starving. Additionally, the false accusations of the affair of the diamond necklace did not improve her reputation, but damaged it even further. This particular event took place around 1784 to 1785 at Versailles, in which Marie Antoinette was involved. The diamond necklace, which would be worth about $14 million today, was primarily commissioned by Louis XV of France for his mistress, Madame du Barry. When the king died, the necklace remained unpaid and almost bankrupted the jewelers. A thief who pretended to be the queen had obtained a diamond necklace and smuggled it to London to be sold off in pieces. Although Marie Antoinette was innocent of any involvement, she was nevertheless guilty in the eyes of the French people. During the Revolution, the French people nicknamed her as Madame Déficit. Unfortunately, in the summer of 1789, Marie and Louis were devastated when heir Louis Joseph died, aged just 7. He was a bright but very sick child and died from tuberculosis of the spine. However, his grief-stricken parents had just little time to mourn, because on the July 14, 1789, 900 French workers and peasants stormed the Bastille, which was a prison, to take control of arms and ammunition. This was just the beginning of the French Revolution. Later that year, on the 6th of October, 10,000 people gathered outside the Palace of Versailles and demanded that the king and queen be brought to Paris. The queen, meanwhile, started dispatching urgent letters to European rulers to help them save the French monarchy. In June 1791, Marie Antoinette plotted together with her lover, Count Axel von Fersen, to help the royal family escape from France. Unfortunately, they were captured and then escorted back to Paris, followed by their imprisonment. Of course, the king and queen had still some supporters, and one of them was Princess de Lamballe, Marie Antoinette's best friend, who refused to take an oath, proclaiming her hatred of the king, queen, and the monarchy. Because of this, and for the assumption that she had any knowledge about treasonous plots coming from the royal court, she was found guilty by the tribunal. Afterwards, the Princess de Lamballe was led out to the courtyard where the mob already waited for her. Until today, it is still not known exactly what happened afterwards, but we know now that a terrible death had been waiting for her. Axel von Fersen argued that the Princess de Lamballe was most fearfully tortured for 4 hours. My pen jibs at giving details. They tore off her breasts with their teeth and then did all possible for 2 whole hours to force her back to consciousness, to make her death the more agonizing. But it is also believed that the princess was either hit from behind and fell to the ground and was then decapitated. Afterwards, she was apparently stripped naked, tortured and terribly mutilated by the crowd, who wanted to hurt one of Marie Antoinette's closest friends. After this, her head, and also to other assumptions, her heart and genitalia were placed on pikes and then paraded through the streets. And then finally in front of Marie Antoinette's windows of the temple where the queen could see them before being dumped at the boundary stone. In September that year, King Louis XVI agreed to uphold a new constitution and demand to at least keep his symbolic power. However, in the summer of 1792, when France was at war, the powerful Jacobin ruler Maximilien de Robespierre suggested the removal of the king. In September the same year, after a month of horrific massacres in Paris, the National Convention abolished the monarchy, declared the establishment of the French Republic, and arrested the king and queen. In November, evidence of Louis XVI counter-revolutionary intrigues with Austria and other foreign nations were discovered, and the king was put on trial for treason by the National Convention. After being condemned to death by a narrow majority, the king walked on the 21st of January to the guillotine and was executed at the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Obviously, the queen's time in prison was everything but enjoyable. She was constantly under surveillance of guards, and while Marie was initially allowed to remain with her children, authorities soon separated them. Rumor has it that the queen's hair turned white the night before her execution, and today this condition is known as the Marie Antoinette syndrome. Meanwhile, her son, Louis Charles, was locked in a dark chamber where he was fed meager rations, prevented from seeing any outside visitors, and physically abused by his jailers. Isolated and scared, the boy began to display signs of emotional instability, likely exacerbated by the false accusations he was forced to give by his jailers that he had been sexually molested by his mother and aunt, Louis XVI's sister. 9 months after the execution of the king, Marie Antoinette was convicted of high treason and even incestuous relations. After the trial, the queen was also condemned to death, just like her husband before. Her execution took place on the 16th of October, also at the Place de la Concorde. After her execution, her body was placed in a coffin and just dumped into a common grave behind a church. Less than 2 years later, in June 1795, 10-year-old Louis Charles died, likely from tuberculosis worsened by his mistreatment. A physician smuggled the child's heart out of the prison following his autopsy. In 1815, after the Bourbon Restoration, King Louis XVIII returned to the throne and ordered the bodies of his older brother, Louis XVI, and Marie Antoinette exhumed and give a proper burial alongside other French royals inside the Basilica Cathedral of Saint-Denis. After the heart of their child, Louis Charles, was passed to royal relations across the continent for centuries, it finally came to rest alongside his parents' graves. At the end, they were all reunited.